This is the Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic. Join me as I uncover the secrets of the world's most elite CMOs and marketing leaders. The Revenue Driven CMO is sponsored by Web Mechanics, the AI driven performance agency that makes you smarter. What does your
Right.
typical, what are some of your typical routines, or how do you facilitate this communication regularly?
Well, I'll take a step back. Company is comprised of people, right? So if the people aren't informed, involved, engaged, you really marketing is kind of everybody's job in this day and age in particular. So everybody's a representative of the company, even if they're not in a marketing function, even if they're not in an external client facing function. So you really need to make sure they're all empowered and engaged and on board with what's going on. So for me, when I'm communicating with HR, I'm saying, okay, well, you're all responsible for the internal engagement. How are people feeling about these things? Can we get a pulse check on what they're thinking about how we're positioned in the marketplace? And we work together. We collaborate across the board on that and making sure that the employees are informed, that the internal employee comms are supporting a lot of the marketing messages. So I think somebody once said it best when they said, your external messages are your internal messages as well. So you need to let everybody in the company know what you're doing externally so they can be on board with it and not surprised by it. So that's where HR comes in. IT also from facilitation of the messages and facilitation of the MarTech stack too, because right, our MarTech stack has to plug into our systems across the enterprise. So I need to be communicating with them regularly
Yeah,
and hopefully not in a disastrous way, like something has gone wrong.
right.
But all of that kind of syncs up and goes interfunctional coordination.
Wow. So I personally suck badly at this. Just communication in general is an area that I really need to work on, and I know that a lot of others fall into that camp. Do you have any tips or advice for, like, let's suppose that there's a listener who does not have this interfunctional coordination going on, or maybe it's somewhat dysfunctional. What are some tips or advice that you might offer to go from sort of like 0 to 1 in that category?
Yeah. So one of the things I would recommend is if you are a marketing professional and you don't have an organization that supports the interfunctional coordination at this point, you can start to affect that change by having almost open hours, office hours to drop in. I've also in past companies where it was a little bit more challenging with this type of orientation, was to have these marketing, I think I just called them extended marketing calls. So they were open to everybody within the organization. Come on in, drop in, hear what we're saying, and we would showcase certain things. And then questions would come up naturally. And to be honest, we deliberately would try to place some provocative topics in there to elicit a response and a reaction. And then that would start the dialogue. And then, gee, maybe we should be talking regularly. So you can kind of take that approach to get the ball rolling with it. Um,
That-
I know exactly what it's doing for me, but I'm in the perfect scenario where it's
Yeah.
actually the marketing channel, right? Like it is so incredible. So now some principles that I've had the whole time that I still have, like I shared an office with the Jasper AI guys before they were Jasper AI for 2 years. We were a bunch of schmucks stuck at 3 million. And then the next thing I did was Jasper AI.
Yeah.
Watching that has changed me in a lot of ways. One of the ways is it just gave me this deep-seated belief that the amount of B minus crap that would be floating around the world was going to increase by 1 million X, right?
Mm.
So what does that mean? It means the stuff that's actually the most authentic, the most human, the most vulnerable, like that was going to get amplified even further, right? Like I think that was the stuff that was good in that. So like the lie of AI is thinking that it can actually offer perspective right? It's like you saw these tools and you're like, oh, that can do X for me. And then a lot of people, I think they're like, oh, I'll start using it to post on LinkedIn. But it's like, people don't want that crap. People want a point of view. You know, like what makes my stuff unique is because I'm like in excruciating detail, like articulating only the pain that a CEO of a 20 million ARR SaaS could experience, right? Like in a very clear way, with a lot of transparency and a lot of vulnerability. And one of the people on our team is like, it's like things that I would share with my wife, maybe not even my employees, but like things that like I would tell my best friend, and I'm sitting here writing it and like sending it into the world, right? Um, so that like in terms of like really big picture philosophy, I'm trying to be as authentic as possible, and that's why and as human as possible, and that's why I use video too. I really believe that that is something that ChatGPT cannot do quite yet, right?
That's
Replicate
so
me in a perfect form like
so
this.
you're dropping so much knowledge right now, like on so many layers. I just want to like, sort of unpack a little bit of that, but then I want to keep going because
Yeah.
like, dude, you are money right now. So, vulnerability, basically AI is perpetuating. Like a whole bunch of this content that you're seeing online is AI. That's the average. It's B minus stuff. And so by being vulnerable and knowing your audience and telling these detailed stories, you can cut through the noise. That's one thing that I heard. You
Yep.
can really cut through the noise in that way. I have a couple of, and so that could be a takeaway for anybody listening to this. It's like, yo, be vulnerable, tell your stories, and sort of, you have you have a unfair advantage that you are your target audience, so you can tell those stories so vividly and in
And they
such like,
just resonate so much, you know?
yeah. So I want some advice for, the founder out there who might not be their target audience, or the CMO or CEO who might not be their target audience. I'm also wondering, like, with vulnerability, because there's a line. I mean, there's got to be some line. Maybe you'll tell me there's no line. But like, how much is too much to share? Like, how do you tread that line? Because there's some things that you might not want to share.
So like, I don't think I would share that a specific individual was underperforming on LinkedIn.
Right. Yeah, you're not
Right?
gonna like
Like,
light
you
up.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Things like that. Like, oh, we're gonna like whack a customer success or whatever it is. Like,
Mhm.
no way. Um, I think like I try to like, so it's May 2nd. I'm gonna post a monthly update in a few days. It was actually okay. The last one I posted, people were just like, how did you even write literally, like I went to this event after, they're like, how did you even write that? Like I could they're like, I couldn't send that to my executive team, let alone put it on LinkedIn, right? Because I was
Yeah.
like, yo, fourth down month in a row. We were down 2.3% this month. The competitive environment's terrible. I have no idea when this is going to stop. But the only thing I know is it's not next month. Right? Like
Yeah.
like we need to like we are deeply in the woods and need to figure out how to get out of the woods.
Well, imagine if you could ditch the pipeline roller coaster, the one that makes it completely unpredictable how each and every quarter is going to end up or how the fiscal year is going to end up. As a CMO, I've had that background that you talked about there. Companies can, achieve lots of different milestones. I've seen, the $100 million mark. I've seen an IPO, at a $2 billion mark. I've also seen the sale to private equity. And so, one of the things I always think about is this notion of predictability, because you can't really grow what you can't predict. And so, I know it's sort of sometimes considered the holy grail of what marketing can do, and can we really actually achieve it? But it is achievable. And I think of it from my background. I've been a coach in baseball for basically all of my kids over the last 10 years, and I think the analogy is appropriate that like baseball is an incredibly difficult sport. Hitting is one of the hardest things to do of all sport. And you can want your kid to hit the ball harder, but if your kid doesn't have a level swing, it doesn't matter how hard they swing. You
Mhm.
have to level out the swing. And so when I think about pipeline, I think about that predictability. I think about that consistency of motion and finding a way to know what is the baseline that you can build off it. And so that's why it becomes such a key ingredient.
Mhm.
Um, and so I want to go into that. But I
Mhm.
also thought, there's another side to the marketing equation as a CMO that I think is very important when you talk about a secret sauce. And I think there's also this notion of humility. And I think the best CMOs always are some of the most humble CMOs. We can't fix everything. And I also think that there's another notion around business savviness. As a marketer, the most important element, especially as you come up through the ranks and you become a CMO, is to understand that you're part of a broader ecosystem of activities. And it's when everything fires on all cylinders that you're going to actually find the kind of business success the organization's trying to strive for. The other thing we know about marketers, as well as all marketing departments, whether the largest in the world and best funded or the smallest, there are an unlimited number of projects. And so the best CMOs are humble enough to know they can't fix everything. They're also humble enough to know how they fit into the organization, and they can identify the project with their finite resources to have the most meaningful impact in the organization. And I think that's a really important part of a secret sauce outside of what I would talk about, predictable pipeline.
Yeah, so as an old schooler who's been around a long time, I really like to go back to grassroots. And that is, I'm a big believer, get out of the boardroom. Get out of that boardroom because if you're in that echo chamber where everybody is looking at the same KPI, speaking the same language, you may be missing a larger picture. Get out there, find your consumers, talk to your consumers, spend a little time with competitive analysis. That's really where I spend a lot of fruitful time is looking at competitors, what they're doing, what they're not doing anymore. And then most importantly, where they seem to be putting their emphasis, because there may be some gold in those hills. But most importantly, you kind of get an emphasis and a layout of where things are. Plus, when you do go to the boardroom and there are, opinions or theories or strategies, you're able to pull out a lot of that information and that data of what the competitors are doing, and you've got it right there in front of you. Or if you've had conversations or a little feet on the street with your consumers and you know where they're going or what they're interested in, or quite frankly, where they're hanging out at. As it relates to a marketing initiative, you've got a lot of very powerful information that now you can share and evangelize with the other executives around the table. Get out of that boardroom.
Get out of that boardroom, folks. I love that. And it never ceases to amaze me like how few marketers actually do that, especially at the higher, in the C-suite. A lot of times there will be marketers who, they might be thinking about user voice, like they might be looking at like search query data or like chat transcript data, but so few marketers these days are actually going out, feet on the street, and speaking with people. I'm curious, like,
Yeah,
and we'll dive into the competitor, the competitive spying part of that too. I'm curious to understand some of your methodology there. But when you're thinking to go out, feet on the street, like, what are you doing? Are you literally just like calling folks up, or like in an EDU world, are you going out on the campuses and actually just canvassing, or like, how do you do it?
yeah, my tools are really my shoes. I get out there. So, we have, like I said, we have uh, 7 physical campuses and then online and competency-based information. So I get in the elevator, there's students in the elevator and they've got their scrubs on and they've got their books in their hand. And I always, they're always looking very serious. I'm always like, test today. They're like, yeah. And so, we bond a few minutes and obviously they don't know who I am, but I am happy to ask questions. I had a conversation. I was actually at our Atlanta campus earlier this week, and I have just a truly inspiring conversation with one of our ASN, Associate of Science and Nursing students at our Atlanta campus. And she looked to be probably in her mid to late 30s. which is pretty standard for a lot of our schools. We have a lot of non-traditional students that are going back for that second degree or enhancing, or they've made a complete career change from what they were doing. In her case, she said she had worked in operating rooms and as a tech, and she had worked in healthcare in different roles and entry level roles for about 4 or 5 years. And she was telling me about her 2 boys that she has at home. She's a single mom. And she said, I really just want to show my boys my very best. And she said, I made a New Year's resolution that I was going to make this the year of my best. And it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it.
Um, so I think 2 things. One is, so several years ago, this is a while ago, it was around the holidays, and my boss and mentor, who led the US at Jellyfish, he had, we were talking about the holiday plans. And I said, I'm just going to work because um, nobody else is here. It's otherwise quiet. I'm going to get a lot done, yada, yada. A lot of other people are off. So I'm just going to stay here. And he just said, you're crazy. Don't do that. You're better when you've taken time off. And that was it. That was the only thing he said. But he was right. And so, I used to think I was a part of that whole mentality that, like, being in there early and being seen and being, making it very obvious of like the amount that you were putting in. Um, and I really cared about that. And I thought that that was like a valuable measure of like work ethic and quality of work and all this stuff. And I was very young, in my early 20s at the time. But, even at that time, I had my son. And so I was also balancing that still too. And that was really important to me. But I was trying to do both of those things. And not only him saying that, but him kind of giving me that permission at that young age when he was in the role that he was in and, had mega sort of power and authority, was just like that set the tone for the rest of everything
Yeah.
for me. And knowing that, like, you can't be completely selfish with that. But knowing that it's okay to take that time off and that you're going to be better off by doing that, I think it's just a really important concept. So there's that. And then, particularly in this role, I say new, but I've been here for 2.5 years, but, I was really, this role is so distinctly different from what I was doing at Jellyfish as a VP of client management on an agency side, overseeing multiple clients, and relationships, but, not, and having very deep relationships, but not being on that brand side. Right. And like occasionally getting invited to speak to the president and like talk about marketing. And it was this whole to do, and it was like a big deal. Whereas now, being at API for the last couple of years, it's a different level of managing up and being at kind of the VP position, you need to be incredibly effective at both managing down to your, the layer that is helping you execute the strategic vision of the business, as well as boil all that stuff up into, these consumable marketing, kind of reviews and overviews that not only show that either you're, kicking butt and doing great, or here are the challenges, but here's how we're addressing them, but also, do it in a way, explain remarkable complexity in a way that aligns directly to just the ones that they care about: EBITDA, revenue, profitability, all the things, right? What they actually care about, and being able to roll that up. But also say it to people that largely don't know much about marketing. And so you need the circus analogy, right? But you need that like all the time and in granular ways. And so, that has been a huge I think piece of my growth here is in, really being able to explain marketing to a non-marketer executive and being able to get them to care and understand what the contribution of marketing is to the business and the bottom line, and get them to see that marketing is not this cost center and that it's a revenue center and a revenue driver. And that's just, I mean, for the last at APEI, we've had, a nice kind of improvement in our stock. And as we're going through these earnings calls, we had one last night, and they're continuing to be positive, right? Quarter over quarter, and coming from a place where we were really challenged, to see that stock price go up and to know it's on the heels of, a call where marketing got multiple shout outs, and this is, kind of continuous as a trend. Like, we've done our job slightly, right? Like, there's a 1,000 more conversations that always happen internally in order to get to that point and then remain at that point. But if you've gotten the, an executive level team and those that are running the business to understand marketing's position and contribution within that, you're doing
that. And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us here today. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at revenue-drivencmo.com. That's revenue-drivencmo.com. And hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours. Even if you're already a client, if you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. And that's just because you're a listener of this podcast. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenue-drivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenue-drivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision.